In February of 1973, a young family named Godwin moved into a rented home. A husband, wife, and 3-year-old daughter. Given the time of year, the house being perpetually cold didn't seem abnormal. Easy to explain away. As the days turned into weeks, random noises in the house stopped being background noise and started catching their attention. Stray shadows seemed to linger in the corners of the rooms. The hallway seemed to soak up the overhead light. The husband and wife finally admitted to each other they were uneasy. They had the feeling as if someone was always behind them looking over their shoulder, watching. Their daughter seemed fine at first. She would babble on in her bedroom. First they thought she was just chattering, engaging in the practice speech toddlers often do. Then it seemed she was talking with someone, having a conversation in an empty room. They would walk in almost expecting to see someone, even feeling like someone was there, only to find their daughter alone, looking up at the far wall, eyes locked forward. One night the mother woke up to find their daughter crawling into bed, again. Every night since they moved in, the same routine. She would pick her daughter up, explain that she needed to sleep in her bed like a big girl, and escort the daughter back to her room to great protest. It did no good. They debated locking the door so the daughter couldn't get out, and eventually scolded her for trying to sleep in their bed. The daughter learned to sleep in her room, with her eyes half open, as if closing them would be a bad idea. She trained herself to sleep this way, and for years after they moved out, never fully closed her eyes at night. The family never grew accustomed to the feeling in the Godwin house. As the husband explained it to me, there was no single thing that spooked us there. It was the combination of everything: the cold rooms, the feeling of someone looking over your shoulder, the issues with our daughter. That is what prompted us to move out. As they were loading up the moving truck, a neighbor wandered over, a knowing look on her face. "I wondered how long you would stay," she said casually. "Oh, why is that?" the wife replied. "That house is dark. A man murdered his wife in the corner bedroom, set her on fire." The Godwins looked at each other. The corner bedroom was our daughter's room. The neighbor wished the young family well and vanished inside her own home. The Godwins didn't believe in ghosts or haunted houses. It never crossed their mind at first that they were dealing with anything supernatural. The rooms were cold because it was February, until it wasn't February anymore. The creaks and pops were just the house settling or the wind. The daughter was just babbling in her room or just wanted to sleep close to her parents like many young children do. But by the time they moved out, they believed something else entirely. Not that the house was definitely haunted, but that they could no longer live there regardless of the source of the troubles. But here's the question that has stayed with me ever since I first heard the story. Did the family experience something because the house already had a dark history? Or did the stories surrounding that house shape what later generations believed they experienced? More broadly, do hauntings create stories, or do stories create hauntings? Welcome to Paranormal Possibilities, where we talk about what is possible, what is probable, and what is unlikely. Today we're talking about how the reputation of a haunted location affects our perception. The example of the Godwin house is a good one for this topic because the family moving in had no idea there had been any violent history in the house. They were simply looking to rent a home. They initially dismissed what they later came to suspect was paranormal activity and ultimately moved out. They lasted barely 90 days in the house. If you follow this channel, you know my approach is to be simultaneously scientifically skeptical and completely open-minded to wherever the path may lead. Extraordinary claims deserve careful scrutiny, but unusual experiences deserve to be taken seriously as well. I'm also willing to consider a paranormal instance at face value and how it might impact the topic, rather than blindly dismiss or accept without further scrutiny. For the Godwins, most of their story as I've narrated it is true. I've changed the name of the family, but they really did move out in 90 days because of the unexplained and troubling occurrences. Their daughter really did have conversations in her bedroom and really did begin sleeping with her eyes open after spending weeks trying to escape her room at night. The family never lived in another place they believed was haunted, and none of them ever became avid paranormal enthusiasts or researchers. They simply went on with their lives, relieved to be free from the weight of living in the Godwin house. This is a compelling example because a former knowledge of a house's reputation for paranormal incidents could have subtly led them to expect it. Our brains are prediction machines. If we're told a place is haunted, every unexplained sound becomes more meaningful. Hearing a creak in the night in a house someone told you is haunted when you moved in immediately changes your perception of what is happening. you might jump right to the conclusion that a creak you just heard was a ghost. And even if you think it was probably just a house settling, the idea of it being a ghost or poltergeist is still in the back of your mind, influencing your opinion. As the occurrences stack up, you might then be quick to agree the house is indeed haunted without ever considering the alternative explanations. But the Godwins had no knowledge of the house's past. They weren't thinking about ghosts or haunting. They were just trying to unpack their boxes, settle in, and get on with life. They waved off the cold spots, the creaks, and their daughter's strange new behavior until they could no longer stand it. And so, in 90 days, they broke their lease and left. Only then did they hear from the neighbor that the Godwin house had a reputation as being haunted. I've purposely left the location of the Godwin house anonymous because any house in the world could have a similar history and occurrences. But I know the street address, and in my research for this episode, attempted to track down whether or not the story told by the neighbor was true. A husband murdering his wife and setting her on fire is something that would certainly make the newspaper. I expected to find an article and check the newspaper archives for the state where this house stands to this day. Nothing turned up. So I checked the county clerk and recorder vital records. Nothing. I checked the appraisal office records to trace ownership of the lot and then pursued those names to see if any of them had been artificially shortened. I hit another wall. Since the incident in question took place in 1973 and the state's records online only go back to 1960, I was unable to identify any owners prior to the ones I could find, and the ones I could find all lived to at least 1986, meaning none of them were murdered in the house. That doesn't mean the neighbor's claim wasn't accurate. The house was a rental, and it's possible a previous tenant family who wouldn't show up on the deed records lived there and one killed the other. But if they did, it happened prior to 1960, and I couldn't find a murder in the newspapers for that area. It could be a case of grapevine exaggeration. One neighbor says something like, "That woman in the Godwin house died. That's what the ambulance was here for." Then the next neighbor repeats it as, "The woman died. I heard her husband killed her." Then the next says, "You're living there? Well, keep in mind the husband killed his wife, burned her alive," and so on. Either way, one thing not in dispute is that the Godwins, when they moved in, promptly changed their plans and moved right back out 3 months later. Even if you don't have many belongings, and they probably didn't, being relatively newly married at the time, it is still a lot of work to move in somewhere, unpack everything, get set up to live there for years, and then immediately pack back up and move out, finding somewhere else to stay. The Godwins didn't even have another place lined up. They just moved in with the wife's mother until they could find another home to rent. Time was of the essence. They had to get out. There are countless houses, hotels, theaters, opera houses, battlefields, and other locations around the world that have acquired reputations for being haunted. Some are said to be actively haunted, where it is fairly common for someone to witness something that seems supernatural. Others have far more rare events, but still occur on occasion. It is possible that the reputation of a location itself fuels the sightings. That doesn't mean some of the sightings aren't genuine, at least from the perspective of the witness, but if someone stays the night in a hotel they've heard is haunted, confirmation bias might creep in. If I'm alone in the woods and a branch snaps, I don't immediately question if it is Sasquatch, but if I'm in the Pac Northwest in the deep woods, I'm at least open to the idea. Of course, there's a third possibility. Maybe stories don't create hauntings. Maybe hauntings don't create stories. Maybe they create each other. An unexplained experience becomes a story, and that story shapes how future visitors interpret what they encounter. Those new experiences become new stories. Over time, the two become almost impossible to separate. But in the case of the Godwins, that cycle never had a chance to begin. They didn't know the stories. They weren't looking for ghosts. They were simply trying to live their lives. Whether houses can truly be haunted isn't really the point of this episode. The question is how stories and experiences influence one another. Some locations acquire reputations that last for generations. Whether those reputations begin with genuine unexplained events, ordinary tragedies that grew in the telling, or some combination of the two is often impossible to determine decades later. But once a place gains that reputation, every new experience has the potential to reinforce it. I've spoken to many people who have had paranormal experiences, and the ones I tend to lean forward and listen closely to are the ones who don't think about ghosts and hauntings normally. They have an encounter or an experience, they can't explain it, and almost never talk about it. Mr. Godwin, for example, admits we'll never know for sure what he experienced. They don't dramatize their story, they don't change it. It just becomes a strange footnote of lore within their family and only persists if younger generations discover it and ask questions. Otherwise, it is lost to time. For people like that, the paranormal isn't a novelty. It is an experience they had, and they are happy to get past it and get on with their lives. This isn't to say that having an interest in paranormal possibilities disqualifies someone's story. I'm sitting here talking about this on a channel that goes by that very name. It just means that everyone may have a paranormal story, even the ones you'd never guess have one. They just don't talk about it, and more often than not, there's some truth to their occurrence. So, where does that leave us? If someone tells you a place is haunted before you ever step inside it, be cautious. Our expectations shape what we notice, what we remember, and sometimes even what we think we experienced. But if you have an unexplained experience before anyone tells you there's supposed to be one, that deserves your attention too, because those are often the stories least influenced by expectation, which brings us back to the Godwins. What if that neighbor had wandered over on the day they moved in instead of the day they moved out? Would they have lasted 90 days, 30, a week, or would nothing have changed at all? We'll never know, and maybe that's why hauntings continue to fascinate us. They leave us with questions that are often more interesting than the answers. So now it is your turn. If you're willing to share, tell me in the comments whether you have ever had an experience with what you believe might have been a haunting or a ghost. And one more question. Did you know the place already had a reputation, or did you only discover the stories afterward? Please like and subscribe if this video was of interest. My channel is just starting to haunt YouTube, and I'm looking forward to growing it with you. And remember, the possibilities are endless.